Hello, and welcome to our series, Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. I'm Russell Robinson, Chief Executive Officer of Jewish National Fund USA. The time has come to be the voice of what Zionism really is. We're exposing the beautiful and diverse facets and facts of Zionism. Join me on this journey, together with Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. This is Zionism. Moshe Samuels is Chief Executive Officer of Interwoven, an organization that seeks to help Israelis gain a better understanding and a renewed appreciation of American counterparts. He has a long history of leadership roles in the United States and in the educational world. He moved to Israel, where his new TV miniseries, The New Jew, that aims to introduce Israelis to American Jewry, is getting rave reviews. Please welcome Moshe Samuels. Moshe, welcome to ZTV, to the Zionist Studios. Our conversation about Zionism today to an audience across the world. And really, you're that kind of an expert for us. You really know about the Jewish community here in the United States, the Jewish community in Israel. You have an organization, Interwoven, where you're trying to bring the knowledge of American Jewry to Israel. Tell us something about what you're doing.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Russell. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. Yes, I was an emissary of the Jewish Agency in New York City between 2015 and 2019. And during those years, it was like a sense that there's like a crisis between the two epicenters of the Jewish world. And I was thinking to myself, and I spent 20 years of my career as an Israel educator, educating American Jews, mostly young American Jews, about Jewish life in America. And I felt like, if we say that there's a crisis and that we need to bridge this gap, maybe it's time for us to also invest in educating Israelis about Jewish life outside of Israel, more specifically about Jewish life in North America, which is, the largest Jewish community outside of Israel. And so I founded our nonprofit, Shazur Interwoven, and what we do is we develop curricula, programs to teach Israelis about Jewish life in America in different educational systems like the pre-army mechinot. We train teachers in the school system. We work with youth movements. And in addition, I think what we're known for most is that we bring delegations of Israeli leadership, educators, rabbis, politicians, journalists to North America to experience Jewish life here. And it's really a transformative experience for them. It's kind of like the buzzword is like a reverse birthright. It's not exactly a reverse birthright, not on the scale and on the atmosphere of the trip, but it really is an in-depth encounter with contemporary Jewish life in America. And our hopes are that when these leaders come back to Israel, this trickles down to the systems that they are heading nowadays.
So we're talking, to so many people about, I'm using the word Zionism, where you're bringing Israelis to learn about Jewish life here, which means, Americans are learning about. Isn't that really kind of a definition of Zionism in one way?
Yeah, I think that Israeli society right now matured a lot. We grew up with a specific Zionist concept of negation of the diaspora, that there is no authenticity to Jewish life outside of Israel. And I think 75 years, more or less, going into the Israeli, the State of Israel project, that nowadays Israeli society is mature enough and feels safe enough in their own Jewish identity in Israel, to their own Israeli identity, that they're willing to put a question mark on that concept of negation of the diaspora, and in many ways, kind of like adapt the model of Echad Ha'am, which talks about Israel not being just necessarily the ingathering of Jews from all over the world, but serving as a cultural center and inspiration for Jews all over the world. And so what we're trying to do is to encourage Israelis to take upon themselves that role, to say, Israel plays a pivotal role in Jewish identity for Jews all over the place. It's our responsibility as Israelis to understand the reality of Jews all over the world, to respect that reality, to respect Jewish life in other places around the world, and then to see how do we as Israel, how can we contribute and inspire Jewish life in other places.
So when you brought Israelis here and they're talking to an American Jew, and the American Jew talks about their Zionism, what do you see? What's that conversation like?
So I think that the key point here for success in this endeavor is the people-to-people aspect. You know, again, when we just talk about statistics or opinions, then it stays more distant. And also, I think that's where Israelis kind of say, oh, you aren't really Zionists, right, if you don't come to Israel. But once you actually come here and you encounter American Jews in their own environment, and you see that Israeli flag on the bima in the synagogue on a Friday night service, right? And you have those in-person conversations over a Shabbat dinner, or you visit an institution, and be it a school where you have the words of Hatikva on the wall and Israeli flags, and the kids are speaking Hebrew, or any of the big institutions of Jewish life in America. That plays, that touches people in a way, and they say we weren't even aware how important Israel is for Jewish identity here in North America. And that's really transformative for them. And I'll say also at the same time, another thing that's transformative is voices of American Jews saying, we love Israel, we're invested in this project so deeply, and at the same time, we don't necessarily feel accepted to the same point that we would like to. When it comes to questions of religious pluralism, and it's really important for Israelis visiting here to hear those voices and to say, what is our responsibility towards American Jews? They're so invested in us. Where is our investment in return? Where are we meeting them halfway?
So I've always found it's also an interesting conversation, and we've had it on this show, where American Jews will talk to an Israeli almost about politics as if that was Zionism. Who are you voting for? Who's the party? Who are you for? How does those conversations go?
So I'm not going to say that we steer away from them on purpose. That's definitely not the case. But we're trying to go beyond that. I'll say two things about that. First of all, I personally don't think that the substantial difference between Israeli Jews and American Jews is around political issues, be it around the conflict or be it around religion and state. I think those are symptoms to differences that are much bigger or much inherent to our identities. I specifically, as you could tell by my English, I'm an American-born Israeli, but when our great-grandparents decided to come to America, they made a choice that said, we see Jewish future taking place in the Golden Medina. That's where it's going to take. That's where we see the future, and that's where Jews will thrive. And when the great-grandparents of many of the Israelis that are on our trips, when they made a conscious choice to say, no, Jewish life is going to take place in Israel with auto-emancipation, right? With a self-definition. So we come with a very different core narrative, and that core narrative, also leads to a very different type of reality where American Jews still, even though they're a thriving minority, still identify as a minority, and Israelis are sovereign. And that leads to a whole different just perspective on the world, on political affairs, on world affairs. And so we want to go back to that. We don't want to put the emphasis on, yes, total compromise, not total compromise, yes, two-state solution, no two-state solution. Those are all symptoms, and we're trying to go back to see why is it that we see the reality, this political reality, in such different terms. And this just comes to the fact that we have a different narrative and a different, we're Middle Eastern. in a deep place, we are a Middle Eastern country, no matter where you come from around the world. And Americans, I think American Jews need to realize that about us as well. So we're trying to go back to those more basic elements of our.
So you are part of a production of a TV show
Yes.
called The New Jew, which took the American Jewish experience and is hitting unbelievable reviews throughout Israel and viewership. Tell us about the show, how it came about, and tell me some of the stories that came from it.
Sure. So yes, I'm the creator of The New Jew. As I was starting my nonprofit, I was thinking how, that's a top-bottom approach where we get to work with Israeli leadership and hopefully it trickles down. And I was thinking to myself, how do I do the reverse? How do I reach a critical mass of Israelis? And the best way to do that is primetime television, right? You could really literally bring the narrative of American Jewry into every living room in Israel simultaneously. And so I thought of how do we bring the story? And I was lucky enough to meet a very famous Israeli comedian named Guri Alfi. He's the host of the late night show in Israel for many, many years. So imagine like a Jimmy Fallon type character. And he was spending a year trying his luck in Hollywood. And I convinced him to say, maybe he like many Israelis spending a significant time abroad, he was going through his own identity crisis, exploring what does it mean to be Jewish outside of Israel, outside of the place where Judaism is in the public sphere, and I never have to invest or ask questions about my Judaism. It's just there. I take it for granted. And so he was going through that his own identity crisis, and I pitched this idea to him in this pivotal moment in his life where he said, "I love this idea," and then basically we went on a journey with the camera crew across North America and exposed Guri and the Israeli viewer to different expressions of Jewish life.
Tell us some of the funny stories.
Sure. So it was anywhere from maybe it could be Central Synagogue here in New York, which is the establishment in many ways, right? It's the largest Reform synagogue in New York today. But then also going to an alternative community of young Jews that are all ski instructors in the Rockies, and they have a ski lodge where they are forming an alternative Jewish community in Frisco, Colorado, where you don't need a rabbi and you don't need the establishment. So and we put those two items back to back in the series to show that Jewish life isn't one or the other, right? It's this tension between established religion and this bottom-up young initiative.
Or he's going on this journey with you, and
Yeah.
and he meets the Rocky Mountain ski instructors.
Sure.
What did he think?
So those moments were the most, I think, impactful, right? Meeting Jews that were less affiliated and yet make it a conscious choice to engage in Judaism to some extent in their life. For him as a secular Israeli, which never had to think about the Jewish choices that he makes because the calendar is the Jewish calendar, right? Then the Shabbat is just, everyone knows when it's Shabbat, everyone knows the Yom Kippur, there won't be a car driving. He speaks Hebrew, he pays taxes to a Jewish country. He never has to think about it. And it was in those places, the more remote places, the places which were less affiliated or less established, where suddenly he sees these young Jews that are making conscious choices if, when, how, why they do Jewish in their life. And he started asking himself those questions as well. And I think that was the reason why the series was so popular and successful in Israel, is because it really encouraged Israelis to start asking those questions. It wasn't an anthropological exploration of Jewish life in America. It was, what can we as Israelis, we're looking in a mirror. American Jewry is our significant other. And when we're looking at them, we start asking questions about ourselves, about our Jewish identity, about where we want to take our Jewish journey. And I think that was really the most important part of the series.
יהודים! בשנה האחרונה נדדתי בין קהילות יהדות ארצות הברית. נפגשתי כאן עם כל מיני סוגי אנשים שהכירו לי אורח חיים יהודי שלא הכרתי.
The woman at the airport tell me straight up, you don't look Jewish. Oh, you do look Jewish, Natasha?
You're Jewish by choice. It's all choice.
I
Are we still Am Echad?
Of course we are. I'm their rabbi, and yet when I go to Israel, their own rabbi is not recognized.
קר לי מאוד, והעיזים האלה מסריחות, בוא נעשה את זה זריז.
אני מבין עברית.
הנה מה טוב ומה נעים.
היהודי החדש, סדרה חדשה, שני אחרי המפקדת.
So it's traveling around America, and you know, so many people talk about, I don't mean to use the Rocky Mountain Jews. They don't care about Israel. They don't care about their Judaism. Where if you're outside of the main centers, if you're not religious, you're really not connected to Judaism, to Israel. Did you find that?
No, I must admit that I think I went into this project potentially more concerned, like about what you just mentioned. And I have to admit that I at the end of this project, I'm a lot more optimistic about the trajectory of Jewish life in America. I actually think that these young American Jews, you know, we had an amazing segment in AEPI in the University of Colorado. It's a party campus. And these kids were, in many ways, illiterate when it comes to both their Jewish knowledge and their Israel knowledge. And that said, they made a conscious choice to be part of AEPI, right? They want to belong to a Jewish community. And there were different expressions of Jewish life, you know, a menorah on the shelf there, and the Jewish food that they still have, and the holidays that they celebrate. And I think that's really beautiful to see young American Jews that, you know, even with all the statistics about unaffiliation and whatever, still choose Judaism. I think there's something about our culture that is extremely impactful, and people want to belong. And I'm optimistic. I think young American Jews still really want to belong to something.
I'm glad you are, because I feel the same. I think that the Jew out there is in our tent. You know, we defined what that tent is, and we sort of built whatever, I don't know what affiliated, we defined it, not them. They said they want to be Jewish.
And I want to add something, since we're talking about Zionism. I think Israel could play a critical role in that moving forward. You know, as we're seeing in the different polls, you know, the latest Pew poll survey that, you know, 41% of Jews ages 18 to 29 say that they're Jews of no religion, that they're unaffiliated in any way. That means that they're defining their Judaism in cultural terms. And again, going back to what we're trying to do in Shazul, if we Israelis view Israel as a cultural center that could inspire Jewish life elsewhere, then there's a potential for Israel to become that source of inspiration for these cultural American Jews that don't have anything to do with religion, but that the secular concept of Israel could really touch them and impact them in a very significant way. Like that could be, for many American Jews, I don't want to say a replacement, but at least definitely a significant supplement to their Jewish life and their Jewish identity here in America.
So that's going to take me on this great leap, and I thank you for it, because we're at Jewish National Fund, and you're part of it, building this village. We're calling it for now the World Zionist Village in Beersheba. And we always talk about it's not about buildings and building a new conversation. You have been running our focus groups, and I think it's over 1,300 people. What have you found? We're trying to bring this Jewish community from Barcelona to Beersheba to Birmingham, Alabama, just as you're talking about, together. In one way or another, what have some of the conversations that you had, matter of fact, and I'm going to lead with it, one of the earlier ones was with young people and the word Zionism and the lack of knowledge of the definition of it. Was that shocking to you?
I don't know if it was shocking. In some ways, it was upsetting to hear the fact that so many young American Jews that want to spend a year in Israel, like these are the ones who are saying, yes, I'm invested in this, kind of have a pushback when it comes to the word Zionism. They say, for either external reasons, it won't look well on my CV, or I'll have a hard time explaining it to my friends, or on an internal reason, saying, I don't know what I feel towards this word. Like I'm coming to Israel because I think I'll have an interesting experience academically or professionally on an internship, and I want to explore my relationship with Israel, but I don't want to self-define myself as a Zionist quite yet. And we're hearing more and more of these voices from a younger generation. And again, it doesn't surprise me when it comes to the political climate that we're in right now around the world and specifically here in North America. but it's interesting because I think that the World Zionist Village has the potential beyond the title of Zionism to do Zionism. Both becomes to actually like the location in Be'er Sheva, which is, I mean, how can you not be part of the Zionist initiative if you're in the Negev, right? And that's where you're spending your year in Israel. But also just the fact that the potential that this center has when it comes to interacting with local Israelis in Be'er Sheva, which come from, it's not that homogeneous a population of Tel Aviv. You're talking about meeting real Israel, authentic Israel. And I think that the potential there for engaging these young American Jews, even the ones who are saying, I don't know where I stand about Zionism, spending the year in a place like Be'er Sheva would be a mind-blowing and a watershed moment for them when it comes to their Jewish identity. And I think just by default, they'll be part of this Zionist act.
So you've had these focus groups for us, and we continue with them. You've had young people, and you've had older people. What are they looking for? What's some of the thematics on the American side that they're looking for?
So there's a lot of, we talk about the village being a platform for the next great conversation of the Jewish people, right? Bringing people from all over the world.
Are people interested in that?
Yes, definitely a lot of interest when it comes to that. There is, I would say, some of machloket, right, disagreement on what does that conversation look like? What should it be about? And it's really interesting to see also there's a generational divide. An older generation is very concerned about Jewish continuity, this younger generation being involved, engaged, or committed to Zionism, to the state of Israel, combating anti-Semitism, right? These very big existential questions that I think American Jewry is facing right now. And that's where this older generation is saying, okay, we want to engage with these issues and kind of like train or I would say train is the right word for the next cadre of Jewish leadership in around the world. A younger generation is much more craving those interpersonal interactions with Israelis. They want to see this image of authentic Israel. They want to talk about topics that they think will impact their life a lot more, like climate change, right? So for them, the Negev is an opportunity to talk about the desert and what does it mean to settle the desert and engage with ecology and all these things that, aren't this larger, more classic themes that we as Jews are concerned about, again, anti-Semitism, Zionism, whatnot.
And the organized Jewish world, and I'm challenging us because with the conversation, we sort of want to frame it with all the conversations we want. It's about this, or it's about our rights here, or it's about 2-state, 14-state solution. And that's not what the young people want to talk about.
No, the young people, what they really are craving is to meet Israeli peers, to go out to a bar together, to have a Shabbat dinner together, to and by the way, not just the Jewish Israeli. Like for them, they would love. I think an added value that Be'er Sheva has is that the Bedouin population surrounding it, Arab populations as well. They're craving to understand the complexity of Israel through a personal relationship, not just through the classroom, not just through the the lecture. They want to live Israel like a local.
Meet Israelis and be part of the Jewish world.
Be a local.
I'm Zoe, and I'm from Dream Israel, an incredible teen travel initiative at Jewish National Fund USA. Let me tell you what Dream Israel is. Through this initiative, any high school student can receive a grant of up to $7,500 to put towards their study abroad program in Israel with one of Jewish National Fund USA's academic partners. How do you earn this grant? All you need to do is fundraise for a Jewish National Fund USA philanthropic project in Israel.
Without this Dream Israel grant, I would not be able to be here in Israel.
Thank you, Dream Israel.
Thank you, Dream Israel.
Thank you, Dream Israel, for making my dreams come true.
Take the trip of your dreams with Dream Israel and Jewish National Fund USA.
You've also done focus groups for Israelis.
Yes.
So give me some of the fascinating conversations you've had there.
So Israelis love this idea. Obviously, Be'er Sheva,
because that's not what people wouldn't think.
So it's really interesting to see. They love it for multiple different reasons, right? They love. There's those, and I think it's totally legitimate, that love this idea because they say this will strengthen our city economically, right? When it comes to just having more young people in our city that are well educated, that are, this will potentially lead to great things for the city of Beersheba. So there's that set of people that are excited. There are people that are saying, I want to learn about something new. I want to burst my bubble as an Israeli, as a Southern Israeli, and I want to engage with people from all over the world. It's going to open new horizons for me, just in like exploring my own Jewish identity. And those are especially young voices that we hear from younger people.
Yeah, so you did teenagers in Beersheba.
Yes, many.
And I'm going to put you on.
Sure.
When you walked into some of those focus groups, you thought, because we talked about it.
Yes.
We're going to get 25 teenagers that were dragged into a focus group and they're going to be watching their watch to see whether 59 minutes could go by fast. What happened?
No, these, especially the younger groups, I think they give me a lot of hope as an Israeli when it comes to the relationship between the two. I think again, they are craving a relationship with world Jewry, with the world at large. They see themselves as citizens of the world. And for them to have this resource of Jews from all over the world coming to their city, and for them to be able to be hosts and also to be inspired and to learn from their guests, that is a very empowering experience for them. They think that this will do them a lot of good in their age group. They're talking about how do we, as local Beershevites, volunteer with the Jews from all over the world? What can we come and teach them, right? They want to host. They want to bring people into their homes. And that's really heartwarming, right? Again, that's why I think I'm so optimistic about the future of our relationship. I think that this younger generation of Israelis is primed to, and I think it feels very secure about their Israeli identity, and they don't have that notion anymore of negation of the diaspora, of saying, no, you could only be a Jew here in Israel. They're a lot more accepting and they're a lot more curious than their grandparents were. And they're craving this relationship now.
Now, you did have some of the older generation,
Yes.
whatever older means,
Yes.
that had concerns. What were some of their concerns?
So, especially in a place like Beersheba, it's somewhat more conservative community, religiously mostly. And there was a set of concerns that talks about what does it mean to bring in liberal or reform Jews into our midst, and that raises a lot of questions. And then how do we bridge these gaps? Like if we want this relationship to work, how do we make sure that the conversation is productive and not, and doesn't end up in splintering? And so that's that set of concerns. There's also a language barrier, especially among an older generation. And this kind of just something we think we need to be aware of is the fact that Beersheba is, in many ways, this embodiment of the ingathering of Jews from all over the world. Right? You literally have Jews from every country, Olim Chadashim, coming to Beersheba. So it's more than just bridging the cultural gap between Americans and Israelis, right? It's bridging the gap between Russian-speaking Jews and Ethiopian Jews and Caucasian Jews and French Jews, right? And in many ways, it's a challenge, but it's also this huge opportunity for us.
So on our show on ZTV, we talk about the different colors of Zionism. We talk about the different people that make up this word called Zionism. So I'm going to ask you, Zionism today, Zionism tomorrow. What would you say to our, especially young people out there, and older people, that, you talk about optimistic world, and I too believe that the world is much better and stronger than we were yesterday. So Moshe, what Zionism today, Zionism tomorrow, give us your dream thoughts and where we should go.
For me, the way I view Zionism nowadays, or where I think Zionism should head, again, I'm going to go back to what I mentioned earlier on this vision of Echad Ha'am. Echad Ha'am was the visionary of cultural Zionism. And he understood that having a diaspora, I know it's a hard word, but having a diaspora is something that's inherent to the Jewish experience. From day one, there were the 2.5 tribes that chose not to enter the land of Israel. That's just part of who we are from the establishment of the first kingdom of Israel. But he also understood that Jewish life outside of Israel needs a source of inspiration. You need to turn to Zion in order to gain that inspiration, in order to feel like you're all part of one collective, even if you're living in different countries around the world. And so I want Israel to assume that role, to take responsibility, to say, yes, we are that source of inspiration. And I don't think we've done a good enough job in Israel inspiring Jews outside of Israel when it comes to their Jewish life. And when I say Jewish life, I don't mean on religious terms, also on religious terms, but just, but I think that Israel right now is going through a cultural renaissance and has the potential of serving as this source of inspiration. I will also say that I think that for American Jews, specifically American Jews, but I think it goes also for Jews all around the world, for this to succeed, and for Israel to assume its role as a cultural center, it is so important that we invest in, I'm sorry to say this, but in studying Hebrew. Hebrew is a key into culture. It's the doorway for culture. For us to be able to utilize the richness of Jewish culture that's developed in Israel, we need to be able to read literature that's within Israel, to hear music that's created in Israel, songs, poetry, right? They could become inspirations for us that the Bible maybe for some Jews might not serve anymore, or other classic Jewish texts might not serve anymore. But there's contemporary Jewish literature that's created in Israel that could be so inspiring and so enriching, and for us to have that, for that to be approachable, it's so important that we put the focus on that.
So Moshe, I want to thank you for inspiring us, inspiring me.
Pleasure.
But I'm going to thank you because the conversation in Hebrew, the conversation between us from Jews all over the world, you're helping to bring that together when you're educating on both sides and around the world. So keep the conversation, Moshe. Keep inspiring us. And we'll order pizza in Hebrew together.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My pleasure being here, Russell.
To watch this and all of our past episodes, go to ZTV, our Zionism Studios YouTube page, and subscribe to get notifications.